Evening and welcome to this evening's event. My name is Susan Powers. I'm at Clarkson University, and I would just like to start with a grateful beginning, Clarkson University's land acknowledgements. Before official Clarkson ceremonies begin, the university has endorsed the statement below to be read, expressing our gratitude and appreciation for the unique and enduring relationships between the indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. The statement says, as the staff, faculty, and students of the Clarkson community, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land before us. We acknowledge we are meeting on the traditional territories of the Akwesasne Mohawk and their ancestors. These lands and the waterways connect us to a vast territorial areas of the Haudenosaunee, Algonquin, Huron, and Abenaki peoples. We recognize and deeply appreciate their connection to this place. These traditional territories were never wholly surrendered and were only claimed by competing French and British crowns, and later New York State. As we move towards healing the past injustices, we must acknowledge these wrongs that have been done and work towards a unified path of coexistence and prosperity. We also recognize the contributions of the Akwesasne Mohawk, Haudenosaunee, and other indigenous peoples that have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and other territories within this country as a whole. Thank you for sharing that with me. I'd just like to introduce this event a little bit more. As I said, my name is Susan Powers. I am the director of the Institute for Sustainable Environment at Clarkson University, and I am the chair of this year's North Country Sustainability Day and Green Living Fair. This event, which is brought to you by NoCoPEACS, the North Country Partnership for Environmental Action, Community, and Sustainability, this is the kickoff event for our Sustainability Day event. We are very, very pleased to have this virtual keynote presentation. Then there will be more to come on campus in person tomorrow on Clarkson's campus in Potsdam, New York. Activities start at 10 and they go through till 3:30 when Kurt Sager will provide our second keynote in person at Clarkson University. He will be talking about the climate change and the Adirondack Mountains. So tonight we are so pleased to have Blake Lavia and Sitsun Aguilera-Izo, who are two artists and community organizers and the organizers of Talking Rivers, an organization that advocates for the rights of the North Country and Haudenosaunee Territory rivers. Their panel presentation tonight doubly serves as the Sustainability Day and Green Living Fair kickoff event, as well as part of their 2-month-long Listening to Water series that brings artists, storytellers, activists, and scientists together to consider what our rivers have to say. Blake, Sitsun, thank you very much for being a part of this event, and we look forward to your panel.
Thank you so much, Susan, for this amazing introduction. And also thank you to all the stellar team behind this year's Sustainability Day and Green Living Fair. This wouldn't have been possible without you all. Thank you. So, my name is Sitsun Aguilera-Izo, and I use they, them pronouns.
My name is Blake Lavia, and I use all pronouns.
As Susan Powers mentioned, we're part of the team of the environmental storytelling collective Talking Wings and the organization Talking Rivers. Together, we've organized this year's Listening to Water Symposium so we can honor the voice of the water that brings life to all.
So tonight, for this discussion, we will be joined by a group of inspiring people to help us listen to one of the most vital ecosystems on Earth, the Great Lake Basin. Our panelists tonight come from different fields of expertise, but have all dedicated their lives to protecting and honoring the Great Lakes watersheds and communities, both humans and beyond. So here we have Jérôme Marty, who is the executive director of the International Association for Great Lake Research. He's a freshwater scientist by training and has contributed to bridging science and policy for the last 10 years in Canada. Then we have Heather Stirratt, is the director of the International Joint Commission's Great Lakes Regional Office. As director, she's leveraging key partnerships across the basin to protect the Great Lakes watershed and their communities. And then we have Abraham Francis, who was the Environmental Services Manager for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne, and is currently a PhD candidate at Clarkson University. He is also the founder of Aronia Collective, which seeks to align Indigenous communities with experts to meet their unique needs and non-Indigenous organizations to engage Indigenous peoples meaningfully.
And before we go on, I would also like to say that very unfortunately, we weren't able to be joined by Gary Ann Charles, who is a member of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation and is part of the Cambium Indigenous Professional Services. We're very sorry that she wasn't able to be with us today. But before we begin with the discussion, I would like to invite the audience to drop questions in the Q&A function at the very bottom of your screens. We'll be asking the questions at the end of the event. And now, let us turn to our panelists. So first, I will ask a question and they will all answer. Can you describe your relationship with the Great Lakes? What do the Great Lakes mean to you? And we will first turn to Heather Stirratt.
Thanks so much, everyone. I'm so honored to join you all today. I am not, unfortunately, joining you from the New York vicinity. I am dialing in today from the traditional homelands of the Dakota and the Anishinaabe people in Minnesota. And so my greetings from this remote territory and land. I am truthfully not from these lands. I was born on the ancestral land of the Cherokee between the shores of the Pigeon River and the Nantahala River Gorge in North Carolina. And in that way, I will just simply share that water centers me. I'm sure that many of you also share that commonality with me. My mother always said that we were drawn to water naturally, and crawling into the dishwater or crawling into a bathtub as a toddler, swimming, fishing, diving in local lakes and oceans in my youth, and certainly having that deep appreciation for natural spaces and rewilding at every opportune moment into adulthood and beyond. So quickly, I will just share that my relationship with the Great Lakes is grounded in a love story that was promulgated on choice and intentionality over time. I have been a public servant in the Great Lakes for over 20 years. And as such, I have personally witnessed many of the environmental traumas that continue to this day. I've also had the opportunity to observe transboundary work amongst all of us to really reach out and change those environmental challenges and leverage the opportunities for those shared coastal and freshwater goals. Really looking forward under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement as a model that we can all use for that good work. It's because of these learned experiences and many others that I simply couldn't pass up the opportunity to be able to work with the International Joint Commission and specifically the Great Lakes Regional Office. My relationship with the Great Lakes is one built on a calling for public service to the people and communities of this region, and also to the health and benefit of the watershed itself. So as I personally reach my half-century mark, I'm mindful that I've spent a great many years working in this region and to serve the people of this region. And so for the Great Lakes and for myself, it will forever be a part of my core identity and my purpose-driven life. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share a little bit about my relationship with the Great Lakes.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much for introducing us into this space. And now I'm going to turn to Abraham Francis. The mic is yours.
Thanks. So Sekoso Gwego Teluniate Yungat Akwesasne Ganagale Wagani Trono. So hi, again, my name's Abraham Francis. I'm Deer Clan from Akwesasne. Just trying to throw this out there. I'm a PhD student, not quite a candidate yet. for some people that nuance is so, but hopefully February I'll get my blessing. But for me, I've been thinking a lot about this relationship, because for me, I don't have a really intimate relationship with the Great Lakes. For me, I have a really, like, my relationship resides here in Akwesasne with the St. Lawrence River. And that's where I grew up, right beside the St. Lawrence. And I think back to my roots as, being a little kid that was flipping over rocks and looking at all these little crayfish and, living through seeing all the transformations that have happened on the St. Lawrence, from, the introduction of the zebra mussel into like the impacts of the round gobies, and, this journey that I've been on for so long, and how over these years I've like equipped myself with my education and with different expertise to delve deeper into what has happened here through the sciences and, even through my culture. And my culture allowed me to open up another understanding of the river with this like intimate, beautiful relationship connected to my heart and to my family. And realizing that we're river people, as a part of my family, and even a history that I'm still learning more and more about, that goes deeper and deeper and deeper, um, from when we were in Mohawk Valley, And so I call in all of these pieces as I think about the river and what it means to me and what's happened to it here, and how is my voice and the work that I do a part of that restoring. Because it was Carol Warrior many years ago that mentioned to me this one river that had been dammed, and how the people in that area talked about that river as a tomb, as a grave site, because so much had been done there that their sacred site had been basically like it had died on them. And for me, when I sort of think about that story making, about that connection in that way, I thought about, what story are we telling here on the St. Lawrence, on the Great Lakes? When I think about the areas of concern, when I think about the fights that were involved, and what necessary science needs to be done here, and how we're all constantly moving and working and working and working in this effort to protect this river for future generations. And I thought with that story about how I don't want the story of the river to be sadness and to be about, failure. I want it to be this story of resurgence, of reclamation, of healing, of calling home every piece of us that has been stolen due to this wave of colonial violence. And that's where I center myself. And because of this relationship here, and I center my work here in Akwesasne, and I think about how the work we do here can influence out beyond this territory, and that's led me to such interesting opportunities and places. And, the biggest reflection in this time is like, I never thought I would be doing this, that I would be traveling to Sault Ste. Marie to talk about connected waterways, and that I would be attending IJC conferences, and that people would actually be listening to the things and advice and the experience that I wanted to share with them, and open to the methods that I wanted to teach them about, and how I see potential in those. And so seeing all of that emerge from the river as this place of connection, where my people and a lot of other people would come here, and the way we think about Akwesasne as this giant intersection in the highway throughout the rest of this territory. So for me, I kind of think about how at this local scale, and how in this place in Akwesasne, we're able to transform things on a global scale and introduce these ideas, and learning all of those pieces and tying them all together with this beautiful bow. And for me, that's like my heart, that's my passion, and that's what that means to me. The river as family, as community, as this memory that ties me back so far, but also is tying me towards the future of the change that is happening here, and that I can be a part of it. And so that's what it means to me, and that's what my relationship with the Great Lakes looks like into the St. Lawrence, is just this memory of this connection to this place. And that inspires me to do the work that I do. It gets me up every day when I'm so tired, and and I just keep showing up. And again, reminding myself of the words that Carol Warrior gave me, was that you're enough. Regardless of what these systems try to teach you or try to impose on you and what you're thinking, you are enough. And that is always just enough to get me through waking up and showing up again, regardless of how hard it can be and how much I have to struggle through those things. And, the people represented here on this board, on this team, are a part of that. So that's what I would love to share with you guys. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Abraham Francis, for sharing that connection, connecting the waters from the Great Lakes to the Great River. Thank you. And now passing the mic on to Jérôme Marty.
Thank you very much. And what can I add after such a great introduction, Abe? And well, I will first say that I am joining you here from Ottawa in Canada, located on the unceded and surrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And I recently learned that the name of the city of Ottawa was given by a community, the Ottawa people, with a D maybe, who actually were located pretty far from Ottawa. They had there was some members of the community that came to this region and gave the name of the city. And there is a debate actually within the local community here that Ottawa should be renamed and should be called Kichisipi, which is linked to the name of the river, the Ottawa River, that, as we call it, which should be called the Kichisipi River. So I don't have the same roots as Abe, because Abe, you have the roots from your family, the long journey that your family has gone through the region, and you develop your own roots. In my case, I came to Canada from another country about 28 years ago. And I came here to learn about water because in Europe, where I came from, there is water, but there is also many, many people. And if you want to study the natural environment, you don't have much opportunities left to do so. And I came here to study algae. I was looking at them under a microscope. Then I learned about little bugs, zooplankton, and then learned after about fish and food webs and things like that. My connection with the Great Lakes is not just the Great Lakes. I always have to say, and it's really important to say it within groups of scientists, within groups of government people, that it is about the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes. And we forget that all the time. There are even some maps that are not showing the St. Lawrence River the way it should be. And I'm not going to point at any of these maps tonight, but they exist. So it is about the Great Lakes, but it is also about a great river. And so for me, the relationship is, as a scientist, I did a PhD, yes, some years ago, and learned some skills to study how systems are changing, the effects of perturbations on these systems. And I worked on nutrients, on invasive species that are part of the Great Lakes life today and how they change so much. So when I think about the Great Lakes, my relationship is about it. It's an inland sea. It's a place that supports one of the largest watershed on the planet. It's really a marvelous place. Lots of people, of course, that depends on that ecosystem, but also lots of really unique features, beautiful things within nature, within even the little algae. They are, I think, magnificent little things when you look at them under a microscope. It's a place to live for me because I started my journey in Montreal. I started my new life here and my new family here. And my partner is also an aquatic limnologist, an aquatic ecologist. So our poor kids suffered quite a bit with the two parents talking about water stuff all the time. It's a place where I had the opportunity and really, yes, an opportunity that was offered to work on water, which I think is to me something I'm extremely grateful to have been able to find things to do everywhere when we had to move. And I think we moved 7 times in the Great Lakes Basin when we were students and then starting to work. It's a place for change, the Great Lakes to me, because I look back at the history of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence. They are very different to what they are today. And that history started a very long time ago. And there are things very interesting about the glaciation that we can learn from and things we see today. So I am out of time and I will stop here for now, Blake and Titsun. Thank you.
Oh, thank you again for closing the circle, and especially bring the connection between the Great River and the Great Lakes, and how this brought you all into these spaces. And we're so honored that you're all joining us in these spaces. And so now for the next question. And this is a question again for you all. So in the discussion about the Great Lakes and of course the Great River, we usually focus on the needs, and this specifically for the Great Lakes Basin, of the 38 plus million plus people, humans, that are part of the Great Lakes ecosystems. However, this conversation doesn't often consider the needs of the Great Lakes and the ecosystems they sustain. So, in your opinion, what are the environmental needs of the Great Lakes? How can humans fulfill their responsibility as members of the watershed to help meet these needs? And for this time, I'm going to start with Abraham Francis.
That's a big question, huh? And I think that's I think even this is starting to change. The expansion of like, where do the needs emerge from? I think there's a variety of documents that affirm that the needs that are centered are human needs. The comfort, not safety, but the comfort of humans is often centered in the needs around the Great Lakes. You know, for us in here in Akwesasne, one of the major water level, one of the water level regulators is here. And that's all to prevent flooding, to help regulate water levels along the Great Lakes, keep it more stable for navigation, for hydro energy, for municipal water supplies. And this is me just picking pieces from Tony David's talk just earlier this week and how he was emphasizing the importance of that. But this is where the needs are centered within the management of these waters. And so what I'm starting to see though now is the signalings of that need starting to become more expansive, and that we're looking at other aspects around the river. Where are the communities speaking into that? The immigrant community, indigenous communities, other communities of color that are represented around here and are not seen in these spaces. So again, though, I'm speaking from that anthropocentric kind of view as well. But when I come back to it, I also think of the important work that we're doing to start prioritizing different dimensions of the environment, and how that comes into being came into being actually with Plan 2014 for the water regulation. We considered the environment for the first time in over 100 years, which was super cool to me. And so for me, now we're understanding the scope of what our management of the waters has done. And I think now what we're looking towards is how can we transform that? And how can we start prioritizing water quality, habitat quality, making sure that certain species are supported, addressing invasive species, all of these different pieces that we're now calling into the space to consider. And for me, I think that we're still trying to get over that boundary, which I think requires a paradigm shift. And there's a lot of what is being requested at this time to see the river with agency. And as a part of that, we do our science, our monitoring, our research to speak to that river, to speak to that ecosystem and understand what its needs are so we can respond to it. And then ultimately, through that understanding, we can communicate that out to policymakers, to communities, to understand and to make sure that we're all connecting with this space and sharing that understanding that we're a part of making sure that this ecosystem stays healthy and supported across time. And I think we're in that interesting transformation period. And that's what I can recognize. But for me, it does come back to supporting people that are doing this work around the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence ecosystem, prioritizing new ways of understanding what's happening here, bringing in new bits of new knowledge networks to help us be better caretakers, new ways of looking at this. And I keep saying new. Not a lot of these ideas are not new. They've emerged from these landscapes. And, even concepts of sustainability emerging from an Indigenous understanding of our relationships and being better relatives. And that's what I heard in your question was a lot of how could we be better relatives to this ecosystem, to all of those. And for me, that always comes back to the Ohandagalawidekwa and my relationships and the roles and responsibilities that were laid down by my people on how to be a good relative. And that now I'm reinterpreting those things through my understanding of science and the research I have available at my fingertips. And that's where I see, where that focus can be. And it comes back to communicating our science, being more engaged in community, and shifting some of those ways that we're doing things where they come from these colonial histories that were exclusionary, were violent. And I think that, it's going to take time and it's going to take effort. So that's kind of where I'm coming at from that question. And I want to give the other members of this panel to get a chance to respond.
Thank you, Abe, for introducing us into this part of the conversation. And now I'll pass on the word to Jérôme Marty.
Thank you again. And so to me, as a scientist, and a scientist that is in a journey learning about other forms of knowledge as fast as I can, I would say that, so if I first take that scientific hat on my head, there are needs related to the quantity of water, to the quality of the water, understanding all the stressors that existed in the past, and that are now being amplified at a very high rate. We do see impacts of humans in the Great Lakes at a very large space at the moment. And I would say that sometimes I think the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence are talking to us, telling us that there is something going wrong. And I've heard colleagues saying, well, if we have all these floods and some of the disasters that we are having more and more, it's because nature is telling us something. And us humans should be carefully listening to these signals because they are there and they are to amplified in the future. I mentioned nutrients, I mentioned toxins, and in about 17 areas of the Great Lakes, we have the areas of concerns on the Canadian side. And these are areas that we are responsible. We are the cause of these problems, and we need to realize that we all have a role in it, a role that is from the past and a role that is in the present as well. And there is that need that must be fully realized. We all have a responsibility for what happened in the past, because I have all these furnitures around me, all my books, my computer, and so on. And I have the things that I am using every day, including drinking that glass of water that is among the best water, apparently, with the Ottawa River. So that's very important. I would say, and to bridge a little bit with what Abe was saying, we do see an evolution, I find, in the way we recognize the needs for the Great Lakes. And the evolution is one that takes different forms of knowledge, and that knowledge is now being mixed, bridged in a way that it becomes more aligned with the needs of the people. And that is, I think, where there is hope. Because it's not just the scientists now coming in with their books, their equations, and their numbers. It's about how do we present all these forms of knowledge, diverse knowledge, and present them in a way that good decisions can be made locally for the people who are in need of such decisions. So that would be my my contribution here on the needs for the Great Lakes. It's to understand the multiple stressors and then convey the information in a way that is aligned with the needs of the people.
Thank you for reminding us about so many things, Jérôme Marty. And as we continue with this conversation, all those things are very, very present in my mind. And I think, thank you for bringing it to the mind of all of us who joined the call today. And with that said, passing the word on to Heather Stirratt.
So thanks so much, Abe and Jérôme, for your thoughts there. I gave this question some thought and I approached it a little bit differently. So I hope folks will walk alongside of me as I reflect on something that isn't necessarily my everyday work in the career sense, but I have 3 children. And we spend a lot of time talking about the difference between a need, a want, a privilege, and a right. Those are all really loaded and important terms for the next generation to fully appreciate and understand. And I think when we talk about things like clean lands, clean air, clean water, those are basic rights that we should all have. Okay. And yet here in this region, in the Great Lakes and throughout our connecting channels, we have so many challenges there, so many needs unmet. And Jérôme and Abraham have both mentioned many of those. I'm going to mention just a few others, right? Threats from invasive species, lamprey and carp, thinking about the greater frequency and severity of coastal storms, flooding, which puts our own communities at risk, combined sewer overflows, fecal matter ending up in our drinking water sources. These things are not okay. Microplastics that we can't even visually confirm are there with the naked eye. Forever chemicals in our drinking water supplies. It's a lot. And there's no lack of work to do here in this region. So this is something as a parent I take very seriously and talking with my kids about on a regular basis. Every human at every age, at every ability has a role to play. So I agree with the sentiments that were just shared by my colleagues. And simple actions can go a really long way. So thinking about how we handle and reduce our waste streams, how we manage our lands and waters, making sure that we steward appropriately and teach future generations about these same values. And along with that come the risks and benefits associated with both good and bad behaviors. We're going to talk more about climate change, so I won't spend a lot of time talking about that, but I think that that is something that is ever present on this next generation's mind. They're already affected by it. They're already thinking about it and what to do. It's the global tragedy of the commons, right? Because it's everyone's problem. And yet, sadly, no one is solely responsible to address or solve it. And so we really do have to come back to that individual discussion, right? And it's a hard conversation, I think, because folks want tangible confirmation that their actions are going to be meaningful. And that is a hard sell, I think. I'm considering, the 5-year-old that comes up to you and says, why should I recycle? Is it really making a difference on a daily basis? Yes, let's have that conversation. Let's talk about that. I guess a couple of other things that I really was mindful of with this question is just that there are lots of motivations that we can provide this next generation for why their individual contribution is so important. And it really does come back to 3 general things in my mind. We talked a lot about knowledge is power, right? Information, education is a big deal. And whether that's derived from academia or scientific study or faith-based programming, whether it's storytelling from your elders and your grandparents, or whether it's just how you tend to spend your time, bird watching, for example, or spending time listening to that babbling brook, right? These are teachers. And they're experiential, which kind of brings me to the next point, and that is that I think we need to provide learning opportunities through experience and exposure. We have many underrepresented demographics across this great region, which is the Great Lakes and connecting channels, that have never even seen or touched the water, or worse yet, they've been told they shouldn't. They shouldn't. Mm-hmm. It is a traumatic thing in and of itself that continues to exist, and so we need to seek opportunities for safe immersion experiences, exposure to these areas. And if I had more time, I'd tell you about this wonderful experience I had bringing some Pacific Islanders to the Great Lakes as part of my previous job, where I literally walked them out on ancient water, lava flows, and had them drink the water because you can. And I can't tell you how powerful that was for them. And I guess just thinking along those lines, the final thing that I really wanted to mention is it's so important to carry that through to fruition, right? To educate this next generation and all peoples about our region. But so too is it to take that to the next level, and that is to find creative ways of taking that training, that education, and finding ways to meaningfully employ it through stewardship opportunities. And really, that's about building our next workforce here in the Great Lakes that can really steward this region in the way that it should be cared for. And it needs to be cared for. And it's a continuous care. It's not a one-stop shop, one lifetime's worth of work. It's continuous. So those are my thoughts. Thanks for letting me share.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Heather. And now to the next questions. So now we'll be asking you all in more individual questions.
So the first question is going to be for Jérôme Marty. Can you discuss the importance of conveying the Great Lakes needs through science and other forms of communication, such as art and storytelling? In this context, could you talk about the work of the Water Collective?
Thank you, Blake. That's a good question. And so, yeah, in progressing with my work, I started with very basic scientific learnings, as I mentioned, using a microscope and things like that. But even at the beginning, when I knew almost nothing about water, I was amazed by some of these living forms. Diatoms, who are little tiny algae, are beautiful. They have these structure, which is called a frustule. I don't know in English. Maybe I don't have the right words here. But anyway, it's an amazing geometric shape. And you could see art in looking at this type of algae. And so as I continued my work, I had the opportunity to be exposed to other forms of knowledge, artists, and now more recently, maybe over the last 10 years, working as a scientist at the River Institute and being exposed to some indigenous knowledge, for example. I found that it does work to be a scientist and continue to align with these other types of knowledge. There are these bridges that can be made, and it's not true that all the knowledge is so siloed. It can work if we actually invest the time and the efforts to make it work. So recently, Blake, you asked me about a piece that we were asked to produce, and that piece is about sound and the sound of nature. And at the base of that soundscape that we produced is a book called The Sound of Nature from Karen Baker, and Karen Baker is a scientist from UBC. And it appears that as humans, we are not equipped to hear the grand majority of the sound that is around us. We hear very little compared to everything that exists. And there are ways, and there are now technologies that are helping us to hear and understand the things we don't hear with our naked ear. And when we started that project, it was about collecting sounds from nature, collecting sounds from under the ice, amazing sounds. Who would have thought that it is so noisy under the ice? And there are these fabulous cracks that are maybe for some scary, but for other people, yeah, it is very intriguing as well. The sounds of sturgeons. The sturgeon is a big dinosaur fish, amazing fish from the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. And it makes a sound as a thunder in the water. And when it was first recorded by fish scientists, they had no idea where it came from. They were listening to that sound saying, what is happening at the bottom of this thing here? And then they had cameras and realized that the sturgeon, by moving with their muscle, large masses, were creating that thunder sound. And there are many other stories like that can be said about the sounds of nature. And what we try to do here, Blake and Sitsun, and thank you so much for the opportunity to contribute to the exhibit, is to merge some music with acoustic instrument, a little bit of accordion, banjo, guitar, taking all the sounds of nature that scientists and others have provided to us. And on top of that, we added some data. So there's new technology that you can take a data set and sonify the data. So we use the data of a river that has high flow in the spring, low flows in the summer, and then medium flow in the fall, to inform the music and modify the sounds throughout the piece, which make it a journey of 1 year, because we had 1 year of data. So that's an example where scientists and artists and other knowledge holder can work together and here contributes to making something such as a soundscape.
Thank you so much, Jérôme, for sharing your experience, like blending art and science. And for those of you who are listening, who are here in the North Country, New York, the Shoshone Territory, come to the Brush Gallery in St. Lawrence University to listen to the beautiful piece that they put together. It's really marvelous. Thank you, Jérôme, for talking about it. And now to the next question. This question is for Heather Stirratt. So the Great Lakes ecosystems are partitioned by countless settler colonial borders and governance bodies. In the face of the climate crisis, how can these be transformed in order to align both ecological and social systems?
Yeah, thanks for this question. It is a super important question, and one that I'm going to probably just scratch the surface on for the purposes of tonight's conversation. Maybe just a segue from what Jérôme just shared, which is super inspirational. I cannot wait to listen to that. I think it's important for us to recognize that these systems are dynamic. They're living systems that require that constant care and attention. They breathe. So if you think about the hydrogen cycle, evapotranspiration, our lakes are breathing, our systems are breathing. They expand, they shrink, they move. Wetlands migrate with water levels. They cool, they warm, they provide essential services that once they're lost, it becomes really difficult, if not near impossible, to recreate the high functioning that those systems provide in a natural way. So thinking about climate change, well, climate change is the most pressing challenge of this generation and those that follow. We're already experiencing those unprecedented rates of change, extreme and variable water levels, flooding, lake temperatures that are rising, ice cover that's declining, species are migrating. We're seeing an increased prevalence of wildfires, which actually requires that we use our water resources to help mitigate that terrible outcome. So many intersections with our economies, our life pathways, and our culture are visible to us. And that's important. We shouldn't be repeating history. For example, burning rivers and presence of these chemicals, fish consumption limitations, and drinking prohibitions are certainly not things that we should be, histories that we should be repeating. But when we talk about that in the context of climate change, and when we think about governance and geopolitical perspectives, it's truly easier said than done. I think there are a few things that I really wanted to convey as part of this question. The first is that our financial investments rarely breach our borders, unlike our floodwaters. They rarely breach our borders. I was invited to speak recently at Lakebed 2030, which is a convening that's centered around mapping the bathymetry of our Great Lakes for multiple purposes to modern standards by the year 2030. And currently we sit at 5% of our Great Lakes being mapped to current standards. As it goes, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is an amazing investment, has been a huge contributor towards making some progress there. But that investment really does stop at the Canadian border. Unless we see a matched investment from our Canadian governments, that work does not join these shared waters together. And so what does that tell us about fish spawning beds? What does it tell us about liabilities where we try to release remotely sensed equipment to do this hard work at cost-effective rates, and then we can't retrieve it because it's somehow crossed some line in the middle of a Great Lake that we can't go across for those purposes? So I think we need to really be thinking about how we invest in this region, which is incredibly important. It's all one water body. We need to think about incentivizing, rewarding proven demonstration of good stewardship and innovative approaches. We should be thinking about who to involve so as to help us think through solutions here that are outside, perhaps, of our traditional government branches to really aid us along. And I think we should be given some grace and permission, forgiveness, if you will, to fail. Some of these things will not work, and that shouldn't be frowned upon. That should be looked at as a learning experience. I know from my experience working on the U.S. side, we oftentimes were trying to combat significant erosion around critically endangered dune and swale communities, for example. And so one of the untried technologies here in the Great Lakes was to build offshore reefs to try to buffer from some of that wave energy on the shore. And with great expense and new innovative designs that can handle what are these powerful areas of wave action. So we need some demonstration pilots. We need some ability to test those things. And we should really be looking to our youth who are going to come at this from a completely different angle with different interdisciplinary skill sets and knowledge bases to apply. Getting folks involved in wicked problem solving is always a better approach than trying to do it single-handedly and thinking we all have the right answers. And then I wanted to mention just for a bit that there are some things that we can do our best to try to modify or change when it comes to climate, but there are some things that we may have to live with. And so I think when it comes to climate change, we need to be ever mindful that we need to adapt. We're going to have to make smarter, more resilient choices to ensure the health and safety of our communities across this region. And that's not just communities, but that's people and culture. So that takes intentionality. And I would say we need to ask hard questions. Are we really going to continue to build to the water's edge, for example? Are we really going to continue to permit harmful land use practices? Can we begin to educate folks concertedly about the risk of doing any such thing and what cost reductions might be associated with behaving differently over time? And then, this is a big one for me personally, it keeps me up at night. Are we behind the 8 ball or in front of it when it comes to the next major environmental challenge that will be on our doorsteps in the Great Lakes? And what are we going to do about that? I will say that I am ever hopeful and super grateful, just genuinely grateful to be able to work with so many water quality, science, health, socioeconomic, cultural experts in this region. And especially through the work that the International Joint Commission is doing, it's not more of the same. It's a thoughtful pause with study and just cause through a voice to change our collective trajectory towards something better. It doesn't mean that climate change isn't happening now. It is, but we need to start thinking about what the next steps are. How are we going to be more resilient and make better decisions into the future? And so those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Heather, for your answer, for all the questions you raised, and for making us think about how we're not really working across borders, and how we really start to reconsider. We need to reconsider like where we build, what we are doing, and like also trying, like the importance of trying and not thinking that from above there's all the answers, and accept failure. And so yes, thank you for your answer. And now I'm gonna move on to Abraham Francis for the next question. So if the Great Lakes ecosystems had legally enforceable rights, what would those be? Could the settler colonial framework of rights protect all the connecting waters?
I got to talk about this a lot this week, actually. And a couple of different places. So, my rights of nature journey actually begins with Blake and Simpson, who took the time and the patience to let me go through my mental cartwheels to finally arrive and see the benefit to the rights of nature. And I always begin this with that from a Haudenosaunee perspective, that I find the idea of bestowing rights on nature to be paternalistic, to be pretentious, that like we as human beings have the ability to do this. But then I also sort of come back to this place where harm reduction is a big part of how I've been raised to think about, from, my cousins, from aunties, and, just different people, thinking about how some of the stuff we do is about harm reduction. We participate in policy and lawmaking as Indigenous people because it's harm reduction. Those policies and laws kill people. And I say that, and I mean that. And then my most recent example is that the stringent immigration policies that were put in place by the Canadian government, were part of why a family was lost in the St. Lawrence this last spring. And I think about that a lot. I lost a friend because of that. And I think a lot about how we have to show up and participate in these conversations to change them. And I don't see the rights of nature conversation any different from that. And as I converse with Lee, because I have no faith in the settler colonial legal system and tradition, I think a lot about how my people and how people of color, BIPOC people, have not found justice in these systems that we've been fighting for, and we have to fight on these really extreme levels just to be seen and to be heard and recognized. And I think we're entering into a similar fight with the rights of nature, because I do not want these to just be a performance. We pass a law to appease different groups of people. Look, we've recognized the rights of nature, but we've made it so broad that it doesn't actually mean anything, and nothing can be actualized around it. And that's why I've really appreciated what we've done together and sort of conceptualizing these and thinking through prioritizing ecosystems, prioritizing the agency that's represented there. And, for setting the landscape for me to start thinking about these things, and in the tradition of my people, as I've mentioned, for me, in all these conversations, which Blake and Zinson have so eloquently written into the Bill of Rights of the St. Lawrence River and the Great Lakes, is what I boil down into these three ideas for me, which is that the river has a right to be a right to community, that we are a part of this river, we're part of this ecosystem, our cultures are connected to it. And for me, that reinforces the need of us to be in engagement with the river, the need for an understanding that damage on the land is damage on our people, right? And that this starts leading into conversations about the next piece for me, which is the river has a right to be seen and heard. And as we just heard here, we need to be listening. We need to be monitoring. We need to be out there developing new tools to speak better to this ecosystem. And so it can tell us what it needs. And as a follow-up to that, I think about the river's right to be cared for. That we have a responsibility to care for the river when it needs us, because it takes such good care of us. You know, I drink water that is from the St. Lawrence. I drink, you know, it provides food. It's provided for my people for throughout time. There's like $1 trillion shipping industry that goes through it on an annual basis. Like, there's so much that this river supplies, and it asks for so little from us. In all honesty, when we think about that comparison. And so for me, that restoration, that work that we're doing, coming up with new ideas like Heather's, trying out new things, failing. Let's fall flat on our faces and fail sometimes. And we'll cry about it, and we'll be in community. We'll be like, you know what, we're going to get back up and we're going to do this again. And for me, when I talk about that restoration, and I talk about that caretaking, and I talk about all these pieces and those interconnectivities, what I think is important to remind ourselves is that with environmental restoration, there has to come cultural restoration. We have to make sure that we're reinforcing that relationship so people feel driven and drawn to the river to protect it. Otherwise, it just becomes a thing, a resource for us to ignore. And that's why, you know, ultimately, like, again, I come back to this piece about, I don't know, settler colonial, like, legal system. I don't know if I'm gonna find my justice in there. I don't know if this is gonna mean anything. But recently with Lee talking about it and sort of reinforcing the harm reduction, and he caught something that I said that it just kind of like fell out of my mouth, which was like that the putting these things into action, writing these things, putting them into law, if anything, it stands for harm reduction, but it's also a statement that needs to be responded to. And it plants a seed. As much as I hate planting seed after seed after seed, waiting for things to grow, because I feel like that's what we've been doing for a very long time, but I'm seeing the action. So ignore me on that one a little bit. But again, I really struggle with that, because I think we're starting something that may take hundreds of years to kind of move forward, which is scary to think about, right? But you know, when I think about the papal bulls from over 500 years, that they were used as justification to deny the Oneida people their land claims right, which had these like resounding impacts. And now it's been, you know, the Pope has said no more papal bulls, disregard them. What does that mean? But that's already in the narrative of the legal system, and it has been used as justification. And I think that there's power in that. And there's also power to co-opt it. So I wonder what it means. I want to test it out. I want to see it. You know, I think I've seen some examples of failures that kind of make me a little bit timid, but that's where I see this kind of like, for me, the rights of nature, the rights of the river is imbuing that responsibility amongst communities, is seeing the agency that's represented in the landscapes around us and writing that into existence and reinforcing structures around it to support that, challenging the ways that we look at this ecosystem and the borders that have been imposed upon it, even the way we listen to it, the way we understand it, all of the different ways that we can approach. Because I'll take it back to one of my professors in my master's program who said, complex issues require complex solutions. And that's exactly what we're going to need as we address climate change, as we address this kind of as these issues around the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River. And so that's where I'm kind of at. I know it may sound a little bit jumbled, but that for me, it weaves together in this beautiful way, picking together all these different pieces, feeling exposed and insecure and, you know, afraid of failure. But, you know, I really appreciate Heather's words, like, let's fail, let's mess some things up, not necessarily environmentally, but let's do something. And so for me, that's what I think about when what you were talking about, rights of rivers and these settler colonial legal systems.
Thank you so much, Abe, and for sharing your thoughts. What your your experience has been so far, how your perspective has changed, but most of all for reminding us that ecosystems, the rivers are alive, and we have shared roles and responsibilities that we have forgotten. So thank you. And now we are going on to the next and final question.
So kind of summing up everything you all said, which is almost impossible to sum up because it just goes in so many amazingly different directions, all of which can lead to beautiful potential futures. What are your hopes for the future of the Great Lakes, and how can we get there? Dropping this very complicated question into this conversation, and I'm gonna pass the word first to Jérôme.
Thank you. Oh, I'm going to break the ice on that one. Stress is up. So my hopes for the Great Lakes is that we continue to do exact what we are doing right now. We have on the screen very diverse people with different knowledge, and they're able to share their view, their visions. We all have an idea about what can be restored, how to make things better. And it's really by sharing it together and working together that we're going to find a solution that is going to be the best possible, because it's going to be greater than the sum of the parts. We're going to take some knowledge that Heather has in the United States, in her part of the Great Lakes, the St. Lawrence River with Abe, and we can include some arts into it because it's a powerful way to communicate with the public. And it is going to lead, in my opinion, to better decisions. So that is my hope for the future. I often hear I want to put not a critique, but often we tend to say that we want to make sure that our children are equipped and can take the right decisions for the future. And when I hear that, I'm wondering if my parents were saying exactly the same. And I'm wondering if my great-grandparents were also starting to say the same about their own kids. And I say this because it's a second hope that I have, is that as humans, we have this effect of this moving baseline. We think that where we are is the new normal pretty easily. And then we say, oh, the future is going to be something else. And I really feel, I want to convince everyone, the grandmother, the father that I am, and my kids and their future kids, that really we have to do something right now all together. And there is a sense of urgency, I have to say. I think the science is there to support it, but all other forms of knowledge are clearly also saying that we cannot wait, and we are all responsible for the things that has gone wrong to date. And there is a window that is closing that we need to address very, very quickly. So that's my hope that we can work together. And the Great Lakes is a good place to do that, as we all know, and the history shows that, although not in perfect ways sometimes, absolutely not, but it is a place where different countries, different communities, different states, different level of governments, and different people have worked better than in other places of the world together to try to solve some issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer and for the hope that we all need to step up and take action, but still there's that hope of the action coming together and us joining forces. Thank you so much, Jérôme. I'm passing the word on to Abraham.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. And thank you so much for those words, Jérôme. I think hope as a concept has been something that I've been thinking about for quite some time. I remember at the beginning of the summer this year, I was extremely hopeful. I was excited about life. I was like, we're going to do all these amazing things. Everything's going to work out fine. And it was funny for me because throughout the summer, my hope kind of eroded. And I kept having conversations with people about hope. And I just remember arriving at school in the fall and just feeling hopeless, feeling like I just felt lost and disconnected. And, as I worked through that feeling of hopelessness, of hope, and reflected on my summer and reflected on all the love and insight that has been provided for me since then, it kind of brought me to this place of like rebuilding and regrounding. That was a part of my process, and that I myself was changing and I was growing and becoming this different person, and that required me to change the way that I was thinking about my situation, thinking about how I was walking through life, but also to reaffirm who I am and what motivates me forward. And what I learned about hope throughout this summer that kind of helped reground me was actually about apocalypses and creation stories. And in an interesting way of looking at it, the way that apocalypses are treated and observed, and on the other side is this opportunity for a creation story, and how our people have experienced so many different types of apocalypses, have been experiencing apocalypse for quite a while, and then sort of like seeing on the other side this creation story, this renewal, this reconnection, to be able to live with the change that has happened and reground ourselves. And I think in a way that's kind of what I'm taking away from this last summer, and thinking about hope as an action. It's something that lives in the front of your forehead from Francis Kiani. And that for me, it's about it, or for them, or what they shared and what I've learned is about action. Hope, it needs to be acted upon. And that's what I think about for how we can get there, right? Like my hope for this ecosystem, for this landscape, is comes back to kids, my children, for me, the future children that I will have, and I'm excited about. The fat-headed Mohawk babies with their brown faces, and I'm so excited for that. But I want to make sure that they have access to a safe, supportive environment, or that, and that they're equipped with the tools to advocate and to support for that. And that they can be proud and say, that I recognize the work you've done here, and I'm going to keep doing it with you and for the next generations, in that spirit of continued intergenerational knowledge transfer, of that continued renewal of that relationship with the landscapes around us. And so for my hope, it's that we get the tools that we need, that we get the questions answered, that we learn more, that we learn about new questions that we didn't even know existed, and we find out new ways of how to address it, that we address this issue of unequal funding, that we address this issue of borders implicating our ability to do ecosystem approaches for our caretaking of these landscapes, of caretakings of these rivers, of these waters, of the fish, the birds, of all of creation and their interconnectivities with these landscapes. Now we can see that and we can transform that. Because what always gives me a lot of hope is, the stories from my people that we completely forgot. We forgot everything. We forgot how to fulfill our roles and responsibilities to creation. We've messed up time and time again, but what we were able to do was relearn our ceremonies, relearn our speeches, relearn our connections, and rebuild that relationship. And as we have seen from the historical landscape of the research that has characterized where we are, is my people and the people in these areas were good stewards. And I think that we can come back in those ways and we can do better. And so, yeah, I think for me, it's just about supporting in this effort. It's breaking down these barriers. It's challenging the no's from the structures around us. And we've seen so much possibility out there. And that's kind of one of those lessons I even take away from COVID, is what I'd heard for decades. My life was that certain things weren't possible. And during COVID, we've seen them become possible. And I see the opportunities to be able to change those. And I can see it in the world, the way that I feel loved and accepted in my community as a queer person, that these are signalings of opportunities for things to change. And those are where my hopes live. And that's what keeps me going every day, to keep showing up. So that's kind of how I approach that question.
Amazing. And just all those words, I think, will keep me showing up. And all those little planting, those seeds that, yes, we've been planting lots of seeds, but all the seeds that we're planting in this conversation, I feel them grow, especially that seed of hope. So Nyawa, thank you, Abe. And to end the night, passing it on to Heather.
So thanks so much. I will share. I love everything I'm hearing tonight. It's super inspiring, right? It's like, can we keep this going? Let's order some popcorn and pizza. I would love to do that, right? This particular question really resonates deeply with me, and I'll just share a personal story. Hard to believe, though it is. My husband and I lost our dads within just a couple of months of each other, both to cancer, totally different cancers. It was a about face life-changing moment for both of us. We pulled up stakes in DC, moved to the Great Lakes by choice. That's some of my earlier comments about intentionality and revisiting why you're doing what you're doing and how you're gonna spend your life's moments still yet. When my dad was diagnosed, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And so we had like 4 months, literally 4 months to spend time with him. And there was this book, and it was called There's Always Hope. And so when I read the question and the word hope in there, that made me immediately think back to that book. And I thought, yes, there is always hope, even in like the darkest moments, the steepest hills, the biggest climbs, the most challenging efforts that you think are unwinnable, there's always hope. And so for me, when I think about this in the context of the Great Lakes and creating a more resilient community around this region, I think about 3 things. I think about the importance of advanced state-of-the-art early warning systems. We have to have those. And in the context of my dad, what if we would have been into a doctor sooner and asked all the right questions? Would he still be here? I don't know. But I know that they opened him up and they shut him within an hour of what was supposed to be an 8-hour surgery. That's not helpful. That's not helpful, and we can do better there. So in the context of Great Lakes and all of these pressing challenges that we have, we need long-term advanced finance monitoring systems that can be maintained over time. And we need to really move beyond this like reactionary posture that we're in this region, right? Solve all these sins of the past. Let's get out in front of them. So that's my first one. My second one is, and this is harder to do, but I believe it possible. I have hope. Common understanding through trusted, vulnerable, honest broker communication. So this really hinges on some of the things that Abe was talking about. We've got to share this evolving knowledge of what is so that we can be informed about our decisions now and into the future. We need to know what harm can result. We need to know how long recovery will take, because that informs risk decision-making. And most importantly, with a caveat here, the price of various actions. We shouldn't always be monetizing everything. I wouldn't want to put a value on the fact that I can walk out to Lake Superior, stick my toes in, and my feet will cramp. That's you can't value. That's amazing to me, even though it hurts. It's amazing to me that the water's that cold. I appreciate that. So what's your willingness to pay for this region and its treasured and sacred resources? That is a question, right? So that's my second thing. And then my third thing, and hopefully this is a nice teaser. The International Joint Commission is right on the cusp of releasing our triennial assessment of progress. That's going to come out mid-November. So keep your eyes on that prize. But we really need inclusive processes for sharing and co-drafting decision-making. A seat at the table for every perspective, all perspectives. It's so, so important. And so some of the themes that you just heard me mention are going to be reflected in various ways in that report. And I would love to continue the conversation around the importance of those recommendations that are going to be coming out. So those are my thoughts. And again, I just want to really thank Talking Rivers. I want to thank Clarkson University. Thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. I want to thank my co-panelists because I am so inspired by both of you. It's just amazing. Yeah, wonderful Friday night. Wonderful way to spend a Friday night.
And thank you, Heather, for everything that you shared. Those seeds of hope, but those very concrete seeds of what can we do. And it reminds me of what Abraham Francis said, the right to be listened to. And that early warning system that you mentioned kind of encapsulates a part of that, right? That these ecosystems need to be heard. And it sounds like you all are doing the best you can, which is more than anything that anyone could expect to make that happen, to listen. And with that in mind, we're going to turn to the first question. Again, if you have any extra questions, all the audience, throw them into the Q&A function. But going to the first question, which is from another, sorry, Michael, another river hero out there, Michael Twitz. So people have thrived in the Great Lakes, St. Lawrence River for many generations, thousands of years. In the past, the climate and water level was drastically different than now. What will it take for us to still live and thrive in this region, together and peacefully in the future when the climate inevitably changes? Gigantic question. So we'll open it up to you all.
Yeah, quickly, I would say that there are really diverse ways to answer these questions, many schools of thought and so on. But one that I would say, I'm going to take the view of colleagues at the University of Toronto, Peter Victor, who is an economist, and who really highlights the idea that we can be successful as a society without necessarily having always in mind the idea that society has to grow. The idea of growth is somewhat problematic, in my opinion, and I agree with Peter on that one. So how can we be living together in the future? I don't think we can say that we're going to stop all consumption, but there are many governments who, through their programs, they are trying to find ways to replace the way we consume today with something else. But the reality is that in some cases, and maybe in most of the cases, we should first start thinking about consuming less and better, but less first. And when we think about water, it is crucial to look at this question. We do consume an enormous amount of water. We are among the largest consumer per person on the planet. And how can we be better? Reducing our consumption, I think, is one way to inform the change in and addressing climate change very much. And I realize that not all economists and all people would agree with me. So.
Thank you so much, Jérôme. Thank you for your answer. And now, anyone else would like to tackle this question? We can also move on.
I just want to add something to that real quick. I remember that's actually how Michael and I met and I was reminded of that recently from a paper that I published in September. It finally came out after 3 years. I presented at the River Symposium 3 years ago. But in there, I wrote about what we wrote about was building these relationships amongst immigrant, sort of climate refugees communities, building the space to create dialogue amongst people and understanding. And that way we can sort of situate ourselves so we can be better caretakers of these landscapes around us. That was one of those things that we were thinking about. And a bit of it was inspired by fear, because it was like, if people come here and they don't know that we have rights in this area, they could be abused, or our territories could become smaller, just all these different kinds of components of what could happen should, this area become prime for people to come around here. And so we were really thinking about those components and sort of creating that dialogue. And that brings me to today and sort of the opportunities that we've had to learn about nonviolent communication and sort of the critique it and support each other, and creating those avenues of building empathy around the waters and with each other in those areas. Because I think a lot of this for me comes back to caretaking for each other and supporting each other, that the hyper individualization within our society has promoted sort of this disconnect amongst us. And also sort of that's a part of that capitalistic deficit model that is focused on us always needing more and never having enough and being comfortable. So that was kind of one of those ways that I was thinking about what he was talking about or asking about, is how do we address these complex issues? And I think a lot of it comes back to community building and to situating a responsibility around these landscapes and building that capacity amongst the various communities that will probably be here at some point with climate refugees and the impacts from those. And I think that we could all share a sentiment on how we want people to be prepared to be able to live in community better, so we can avoid issues of xenophobia, racism, homophobia, transphobia, all of the phobias that can disrupt important real relationship building. So that's what I wanted to sort of comment on that.
Thank you again, Abe. And Heather, do you want to address this question?
I just want to say I love that response. I so agree that community is going to be super important. I also think it's about partnerships. It's about leveraging what you do have, even if what you have is a small amount. You couple that together with what others can offer and work towards the same goal. I think there's a lot more that's accomplishable under those terms. And I just wanted to come back to this sense of like adaptation and innovation. It's so important for us to think differently going forward, because the past isn't a good example of what we're going to experience going forward. And it's not going to be stationary. It's going to change. So the notion that we can start to think about our energy needs now and innovate around something different going forward, that we could think around our water consumption rates and needs. That's important. And then this notion of there being benefactors and others that will not see those same benefits from climate related challenges, I think is an important one to recognize. It's not all bad. There are some things that will happen that might be good. And, you know, one of the examples that I heard recently mentioned was for all the bad that quagga mussels have done in our region, for example, they have sure made our water transparent, in which case things like discovering maritime artifacts, shipwrecks, tourism, economy, local boosts to the ability for sports diving, things like that, right? So it's one example, and it may not be your favorite example, but it's an example of how some of these things can be positive too. But we need to really be thinking about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what trajectory we're on, because there might just be a net negative. And that's where we need to redirect and start to think differently.
Thank you, Heather. Yes, we completely agree. And thank you. And the next question would be: as a long-time settler resident of the Niagara region of Ontario, I'm distressed to realize how Canada is not doing its part in looking after the Great Lakes Basin. Do you have any suggestions on what ordinary people like me can do to push governments both to take appropriate responsibility and, more important, to truly learn and absorb the understanding and knowledge of Indigenous peoples?
Another huge question, throwing it out to the room.
So as a Canadian, I agree very much. We are way behind in terms of the support that we do. The Canadian economy is much smaller than the US economy, but still. I think there is a need to, hopefully one day it will happen, I don't know, but elected officials have to really think beyond their mandates and trying to do things that are there to stay for a long time. And we do need more funding for the Great Lakes on the Canadian side, but we do need that funding also, not just for 4 years or for the time of a mandate, but for much longer. So there is that. We need leaders who will recognize that things are going to take time, You cannot change a system as large as the Great Lakes very quickly. You can damage it very quickly, but restore it will take time. So there is really the need to have, at the political level, either leaders that do understand that language, or leaders that have the supports, that they have these knowledge brokers that make sure that the information is conveyed in a way that it could be understood by decision makers and will make better decisions.
Thank you, Jérôme.
Policymakers. That's what I learned recently, and thank you to Susan Powers and Clarkson for making that possible through the Hopkey lecture series. Is policymakers are actually more within reach than you think they are, and they're not out there reading your scientific papers, and they're not like you gotta connect with them, and they're people too. And one of the other ways is get out there and vote, engage in local politics. I know, yeah, get engaged, get involved, and as much as you can, and be kind to yourself in this process. Doesn't mean you have to be involved in everything. Know that what you're contributing matters. And to the final part about that question about engaging Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous people, engage the communities around you. Read the TRC report, the MMIW reports, get into the UN DRIP, support Indigenous efforts to call home to fight for our rights, because I think sometimes it's important to remember too, us being empowered to take care of our communities, also taking care of each other. We do this all together. And that's what I have to contribute to sort of that piece.
So very quickly, I will just maybe offer that this is a great opportunity to share that the International Joint Commission has seats on our boards, our advisory boards, that are Indigenous representatives from various communities across the Great Lakes. If folks are interested, we'd be happy to share more. And we're also in some very early stages of developing a new Indigenous circle that will serve us across not just a specific watershed, but across all the transboundary watersheds that basically move from the westernmost coast to the easternmost coast, that ribbon across our shared countries and shared waters. So there's opportunity like that to get engaged and to really think about how we can do this better, not just binationally, but multinationally. And I would say that the comments from Abe and from Jérôme, also very prominent. Have those conversations, call your representatives, talk to them about what you care, share your stories. The stories coming from constituents are the things that change the world, actually. So I really think that is a very present opportunity for everybody to leverage going forward.
An amazing finale to the night. And I'm very sorry for all the questions we were not able to get to, but wanted to just pass you on to the finale of your Friday evening. Hopefully they can be full of rest, relaxation, and set the tone for an amazing weekend ahead. But just to end a little bit with what the last things that everyone was saying, focusing on what needs to happen. And we heard the need of the Great Lakes, a need to be listened to. And once we listen to this powerful ecosystem that brings life to so many, what do we do? What's the next step? And in some cases, of course, being kind to ourselves in that process, at least what I have learned is that there's the need for us to speak. And we can speak in many different ways. So thank you all for sharing ways in which we can all have our voices be heard and have that voice matter. And we'll pass on, if Susan Powers is still in the room, to Susan Powers to give a grand finale and also let us know about what else is happening that we should be aware of with the Sustainability Day and Green Living Fair. Thank you.
Yes, I'm still here, and thank you all very much. I greatly appreciated hearing all these comments. So tomorrow at Clarkson University in Potsdam, New York, starting at 10 a.m., We've got a building full of exhibitors, workshops, talks, hands-on activities for kids, a kids zone, the North Country Children's Museum, a story walk, storytellers, and then that tops off at 3:30 with Kurt Stager from Paul Smith's College, who's going to talk about climate change in the Adirondack Mountains. And so I hope that some of you can join us tomorrow as well. And I just want to thank you again. This was a great intersection of our two very, very significant paths this fall between the Listening to Water Symposium and our Sustainability Day. What a great way to cross paths and join forces. Our missions are very, very similar, and I appreciate the many different perspectives that we heard tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.